Amy Dash joins us. Of course, she is our Fox Sports Radio legal analyst. And any of these issues, I encourage you to go to League of Justice Sports. It's her site that she started. And Amy, like, again, this is my outside perspective, non-lawyer perspective is, you're right. People are right to be offended morally and sit here and go, that's a toxic workplace environment. But it becomes kind of grandstanding from Congress when the NFL, and people may not like the punishment, they handed down the punishment and people lost their jobs over this. Fair?
Yeah, I think the existence of Daniel Snyder remains a problem, and there are people that are gunning for him to be entirely removed and not just handing duties off to his wife under the guise that he's not involved. And maybe he's not, but I think that it undercuts the accountability of Daniel Snyder, especially now that new things are surfacing, that there was this alleged settlement with somebody who accused him in 2009 of some sort of sexual harassment, potentially assault. So I think the fact that he's still there, the fine really pales in comparison to a lot of the people that were affected by the workplace who feel that bottom line is that at the end of the day, he was the one that was overseeing it all, and he was the one that was aware of it and potentially perpetuating this type of an environment. Okay, so do they have grounds to take the team from him? I think that with Mary Jo White investigating, I think it's really going to be a repeat of what happened with Jerry Richardson, especially now that there is so much attention from Congress, and he's likely going to be subpoenaed. Whether he'll challenge that subpoena in court, he probably will. That remains to be seen. You know, there's a lot of people saying that Daniel Snyder shouldn't have to even be questioned before Congress because this is just simply not a legislative issue. And there are people who feel the opposite, that it will reverberate and affect everything in workplaces across America because the NFL is the gold standard. So I think with all the negativity around him, with Roger Goodell's testimony today, he really, in my opinion, distanced himself from Daniel Snyder, did not in any way condone, and in fact condemned the environment in the Washington Commanders. And I think even though he said that he felt that the NFL had held him accountable, I think there is grounds for the other owners to be able to vote him out just because of the pure spectacle that this has taken on.
The problem with it, though, is that if, again, and this is kind of what I think John Gruden's alleging, like, look, if we're going to go air dirty laundry, you know, there's dirty laundry on a lot of these guys. And that's why I would guess none of them want to get him out, is because they know he'll go to the mattresses and there'll be it'll get really, really ugly for a lot of really powerful people.
I think on the one hand, you're right, because they want to protect themselves, so they don't want to set the precedent of easy removal for any type of an allegation. But I think as things start to add up, you know, the fact that he sent private investigators out to speak to some of these women, Congress is now accusing him of having a dossier on people, of offering hush money. We know there was this alleged settlement that happened related to allegations against him directly. There are now new allegations against him that are being investigated in a second investigation that's being headed up by a former U.S. attorney. I just think there's too much that the owners do not want to be affiliated with, that they do want to distance themselves from him because they don't want to, you know, it's basically like Survivor now. They don't want to be lumped in as condoning, you know, any type of behavior that he might be affiliated with because they're already contending with claims of racial discrimination and tons of other controversial matters. So yeah. I think right now it's like survival of the fittest.
It's really, really, I actually think life in many ways is like a game of Survivor. It's who you're affiliated, you know, right? It's who you're affiliated with. Like that's
they'll protect each other to an extent until they need to start eating each other, and then that's what will proceed to happen.
Which is exactly like life. So I hate to, that's what they should teach in business school. It's like, hey, just watch Survivor. That's kind of that's how it goes. I want to ask.
You saw it happen with the St. Louis Rams too. Like they were all, we're going to fight this, and then eventually, when it started hitting their pocketbooks,
whoa! It's like when a dinner bill comes. They're like, oh wait, what? Now you guys are all ordering apps and dessert and extra bottles of wine. Now the thing comes and everybody forgot their wallet, right?
All of a sudden it was settled. It was just magically settled. So
that's amazing. I did want to have you on about Deshaun Watson. Okay, so 20 of the reported 24 cases have now been settled. or are going to be settled or whatever. What does this do? I know the NFL came out and said this has nothing to do with the collectively bargained upon discipline process, but come on, this it is related, whether it's closure or not, or there's ever closure. What do you think this does for Deshaun Watson in consideration of what the league's going to do?
Well, I think because there is a new process in place under the new CBA where there's actually a neutral arbitrator who can decide not to discipline him at all on some or all of the cases, and the NFL can't get involved at all once that decision's made. I think, there is going to be some independence in terms of the settlement's not affecting it. It's a former federal judge, an experienced person. I really would hope that this person is going to be examining it on a case-by-case basis. And I think if there are problems with the evidence, which it seems like in some of the cases there are, especially since we saw on the criminal side that 2 grand juries didn't recommend charges, I see a scenario where there's a lot of cases that there's no discipline. And then there are some cases, maybe the more serious ones or ones where there's a more convincing evidence where there is discipline. And at that point, the NFL can come in and say, okay, we either agree with the length of the suspension or we don't. And so I think the fact that he settled so many of these might influence the NFL to go in and reduce some of the suspensions if they're on the higher side, because it's 6-game minimum. So 6 games, multiply that by however many cases merit suspensions, if any, and you could be up into 100 games, 120 games. I mean, that's obviously not going to be feasible for the NFL. So they're going to look at their bottom line. If they keep him in the league, they might then reduce the suspensions because the cases are not going to be such a distraction anymore now that they've been settled.
Okay, so what do you think ends up happening? I'm not going to suspend him, 100 games for all of this stuff, right? It's going to be kind of all lumped in. What do you think happens?
I really think potentially a couple of the cases there's discipline in, and then there's not discipline in the majority of the cases because of problems with the evidence or the credibility of the accusers. That's my guess. I mean, it could really go either way. I don't see, 24 cases being given one punishment because I just don't think it would be fair to him, and I don't think it would be fair to the accusers. There's different fact patterns. There's different motivations here. There's different circumstances entirely. There's really no link aside from if you're trying to establish some sort of a pattern in court. But in the context of NFL discipline, there's no link between these different massages. So I see a couple of cases getting the minimum 6. So maybe it goes up to a year, maybe 2 years.
2-year suspension?
I think it could go from a year to 2, and then I think there's going to be an appeal and there's going to be a reduction. Yeah. And by the way, this follows precedent with the NFL. I mean, in multiple past cases, there have been reductions when the suspensions have been challenged.
Right. No. Listen, I'm with you. I understand the idea of suspend. Probably incredibly long suspension where it's like now we're getting tough on crime, we mean business, and then it gets reduced. Does he get credit for time served because he didn't play last year?
That's an interesting thought, actually, Doug. I haven't even given that any thought myself, and I think possibly, that's tough. I have to think about that one, but that's very, very interesting. He was paid, so maybe he decides to forfeit money and ask to have that counted against him. I'm not really sure if they would go for that, but anything's negotiable.
This is such an interesting one. And for people to remember, and of course you can follow our work, League of Justice, or you can listen to our past interview. Just so people are aware, Amy, you've told us before, you vehemently disagree with the idea that the NFL should even be involved in these type of suspensions, which is, these are not contradictory statements, right? It's not, you're like, wait a second. Last time you had her on, she said he shouldn't be suspended for anything. This time you're like, well, it could be 2 years. No, what you're saying is based upon the collective bargaining agreement, based upon precedent, this is what you think will happen. But the truth is, with your legal background and with your understanding of how things work, they shouldn't even be involved in any sort of suspension for something which has not risen to the level of criminal activity.
Right. I don't think they should be involved, exactly what you said, in judging somebody's guilt for a crime that they're accused of, especially if the criminal justice system has declined to take those cases on. So now that doesn't mean the person didn't do what they're accused of. It doesn't mean they did. I just don't think they should be in the business of deciding whether somebody committed a crime. Now, if they want to go in and say, oh, we don't like what he did on the field or with his teammates or do some sort of discipline process for that, okay. But to decide, we feel that in the privacy of a hotel room, he sexually assaulted somebody when nobody else was there, and it's a he said, she said, and there's not direct evidence like video or audio. I think if you're doing it based on circumstantial evidence, there's a big problem with that. That being said, like you just articulated, I still think because of the discipline policy saying that the minimum is 6-game suspension for one accuser, I believe that it would only be fair, and that this is what the judge will do, judge each case on its own merits. And if she thinks there should be suspension, the minimum is 6 games per person.
Fascinating stuff. Amy, great work. Check out League of Justice Sports if you want to read more, learn more. Follow her on social media as well. She's our Fox Sports Radio legal analyst. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
It's always my pleasure, Doug. Thanks so much.